Where do I begin? So, probably tell by the title of the video that I have just graduated high school. And let me just say, that was a load of bullshit. I mean, 4 years, right, to add on to the 13 years of going to school, and 4 of those were, I wouldn't say horrible, but definitely not ideal in a sense. I guess I should show the proof. I don't know how much of this I can show on YouTube without accidentally giving out more information than I need to, but this is my high school diploma. So if you needed any further proof of me graduating high school, that's what I got right there. If you were wondering why I've been gone the last month, well, there's your answer. This is going to be a bit of a rant, because not only am I done with high school, but I'm also at my 3rd or 4th year of doing YouTube. Now, I've had a lot of fun doing this over the years, and I'm not going to stop and worry about that. Not like anybody's watching anyway, but if somebody does happen to come across this, I won't be stopping anytime soon. This is going to be a bit of a rant about my experiences with school in general, and I might talk a little bit about my life leading up to this point. We're going to have to start from the beginning for there. Before I talk about any part of my life, I'm not really open about talking about my personal information on here, but I'm an adult. I can do what I want on here. Let's go all the way back to kindergarten. I started off my school career in a pretty stable situation, home-wise and life-wise. And, you know, I did good in school for at least the first 2 years. So kindergarten and 1st grade, I was pretty consistent and going and stuff. Not that I had a choice. Nobody really has a choice in that when you're that young. And it was after 1st grade that I started to really struggle with going to school. Now, in kindergarten, I had a lot of behavioral issues. My parents would fight a lot while I was home, and sometimes I'd wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning because they were, for lack of better words, beating the fuck out of each other. So that kind of imprinted on me. And as a person who, I'm not sure if it's because of the fighting that I witnessed growing up or if I'm just naturally like this, but growing up, I've noticed that I've had a lot of anger issues. And I remember an instance in kindergarten where at some point, I threw a desk at my peers and at the teacher, and I threw scissors and stuff. I was a pretty bad kid in kindergarten, but I didn't really struggle with going. I didn't have a problem with going. It was a matter of the events that would lead up to my outbursts while I was in school that I kind of struggled with. Another example of my struggles in kindergarten was I was on the playground once, and I don't remember this kid's name. He's my age now, I'm sure of it. And if he ever sees this video, my bad, broski. I did not mean to do that to you. But what happened is I picked up a pretty sizable rock, and, you know, being little 5-year-old me, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. This wasn't even out of anger, but I remember swinging my body kind of like an Olympic thrower or whatever they're called. And I went to throw the rock outside of the playground, domed him in the fucking head. That freaked me out. And that was my first time getting suspended from school. And that was kind of a bit of a kickstart it was a bit of a kickstart leading up to the struggles that I would deal with later in my school life. And, you know, not much happened from there on out. I got suspended a couple times, but nothing too crazy. It'd be homework issues or bad mouthing the teacher, you know, just silly shit that kids do sometimes. Fast forward to 2nd grade. The issues I was having at home were becoming a lot more prevalent, I guess. It affected a lot more of my school life than it did before. It was at this point that my dad had moved out. I was pretty young when that happened. He moved out not long before 2nd grade, and my mom met a new guy who came in, and this guy's a piece of work. I'm not going to say names. I'm not going to name names because that would be pretty inappropriate of me. And it's also just not necessary. But my mom met this guy. He was he seemed okay at first, but I always had like a deep inclination to avoid him because just the vibes he gave off, I guess. And I growing up, I've always been pretty good at telling or judging a person's character. I've always had a weird hyperfixation with body language and stuff. And that I've noticed growing up, I've always paid attention to that. Going off on a tangent though. He gave off a pretty bad vibe. So I kind of avoided him, and, you know, knowing the things I know now is probably for the best. But, so second and third grade, I was moving schools quite a bit. We ended up losing the living quarters that we had initially because my mom was struggling with keeping the rent paid and stuff. And, eventually we moved somewhere else. My memory gets pretty spotty for a bit here. And, you know, with me having to switch schools a lot, I noticed I stopped caring about making friends, and I became a little bitter about it because it was, you know, I was worried I was going to move again. So what the hell is the point of making friends, you know? And the few times during school that I did try to make friends, I had a couple friends here and there, but none of them really stuck because I moved a lot. And then, yeah, second and third grade, I don't remember much of. I know I had issues back then, but I don't quite remember everything that happened back then. Trauma response, I guess. Just brain blocking shit out like it normally does. Silly brain. You know, and I start to remember things a little bit more clearly around fourth grade because it was by this point I had moved a lot of homes. I lived in motels for God knows how long and was homeless a couple times, which wasn't fun. And I could be retelling this a little wrong, but I know fourth grade pretty well in the back of my head. My mom and my two siblings and I ended up moving to Arkansas. The new guy, we'll call him B for short. B had a lot of drug problems. And when he met my mother, she was in a pretty vulnerable state and ended up getting her hooked on some pretty wicked shit. And you know, the homelessness and the moving back and forth kind of affected how often I was going to school. So that didn't really help at all in terms of, you know, motivating me to get a good education, which I think by that point I still didn't quite understand the weight of going to school. And, you know, we moved to Arkansas. We went to go live with my grandmother, who recently passed in February, which is why I took a pretty big break back then. And my two great-grandparents and my grandfather, who thankfully is still around. And while living there, it was a lot more stable. You know, I was in a house and had a room. I shared a room with my siblings, but, you know, we had our own space as kids, which was definitely refreshing compared to the stuff I had grown up with up until that point, which very less than ideal. And, you know, it was the first time in a while that, you know, I started to have fun with school. And I don't even remember. I think I remember the name of the school. It was Pine Haven Elementary. Yeah. I went there for my fourth grade year. And for that, it was a champion school. So it wasn't really a part of any district. And it was a fancy school. Like, you walk in the front, it was like a big L-shaped building. It was massive. It was like bigger than the high school I just graduated from, almost. And you would go in the front door, the ceilings, like it was 2 floors or something like that. And next to the stairs leading up to the second floor, there was just big, giant, I think it's called a bauxite rock or something like that. It was a red rock, and it was huge, and it was just on this, you know, stand of some sort. And I remember that part pretty vividly because even today, I still don't quite understand the importance of that rock. I'm sure I could figure it out if I reached out to somebody there and asked. But that's besides the point. Fourth grade, I started enjoying school quite a bit, and I started to really enjoy school, and I had some good friends. I was friends with the neighbors' kids down the way, and we lived in Benton, so it was a little more foresty and not super urban. And, I got to learn new things. I learned how to go fishing. I learned how to fire a gun from my great grandfather. God, I miss that dude. He was pretty chill, except for when he wasn't, but he was in his 70s. So, I started, developing a sense of, I started to develop a liking for school at that point. And, at that point, I didn't know too many people from Colorado, and that's where I live. If you couldn't tell, you probably couldn't have. But for those of you who don't know, I grew up in Colorado for 90% of my life, except for the year and a half that I lived in Arkansas. But there came a point while I was in school, I think it was right after I finished fourth grade, we ended up getting kicked out of there because problems were stirred up, I guess, or whatever. I don't want to give out too much information about that, but some problems ended up coming up, and we had to move back to Colorado. And that was the first drive to Arkansas was crazy enough as it was, which was a little more comfortable because my great grandfather drove me and my siblings to Arkansas, and my mom kind of went on her own. But it was the drive back to Colorado that really sucked. Packing a 2005 Chevy Cobalt LS, the two-doored one, with 2 dogs, a bunch of bullshit, and, 3 kids and a grown woman was not, it was not very fun. It was not a good time. 3 out of 10 would not recommend. And eventually we got back to Colorado, and the homelessness kind of came afoot again. I was homeless on and off for a good portion of my life up until that point, and really up until I turned 11, and I'll get to that in a minute. So, there were a few times, there was once we stayed with my Nana, my dad's mom, for a little bit in her little apartment, and life was better than it was while living there. But, my mom and dad started contacting each other again, and the fights ensued again. It's just, they cannot stay in a room together without bickering. It's whatever, obviously they were not meant to mesh very well, which is okay. But fast forward a couple of years, I did 5th grade pretty easily. 5th grade, I went to school with my cousin, Alex. We'll call him Alex. Well, that's his name. He doesn't really have much pertinence to the story, if that's the right word. And, the 5th grade was pretty good. I was still in that mindset of, enjoying school and trying to make the most out of it while I still had another, what was it for? 7 or 8 years left. And not even 7, 6 years left or something like that. And I finished that one off pretty well. It was towards the end that, because we were homeless again, I stopped going as much. And, obviously that's truancy, but, we really didn't get in trouble for that because we didn't have a housing situation. So it's not like the police could just come busting down the door and get my mom in trouble for that or whatever, because we were bouncing around all the time. 5th grade, by the skin of my teeth, I made it through with good grades. And, fast forward the summer, we're still homeless. This was probably the longest chunk of my life where I was homeless. Again, not a great experience. Maybe a 2 out of 10. Would not recommend. I like having a bed of my own, and, I've got a lot of things that I enjoy having now in my life that I was not afforded when I was homeless. So fast forward to first day of 6th grade. I was going to go to Man Middle School. Which, I mean, first day wasn't too bad. I was late to my first day, of course, because why wouldn't I be? My mom took me to a gas station, got me a soda and some candy and stuff before I went in, and she took a picture with us together. It was a pretty good start to the day, and despite all of the problems I was dealing with personally, I still had high hopes for school, and first day goes by without a hitch. It wasn't until the school day ended that I walked out into the parking lot, saw my mom, was ready to get going, and her car broke down. That 2005 Chevy Cobalt LS had just about enough of all the driving around my mother did. I don't blame it. And, a lot of driving around. I'm not a fan of car rides anymore unless they're really short. And I hate road trips. I hate them to death. So, car broke down. We didn't quite know what to do. My mom got a piece of poster board or cardboard or something like that and wrote that we needed help and put it under the hood, and we kind of sat there. We ended up sitting there for hours. I think it was about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning when I guess the faculty who were still at the school called the police to check on us or something. And that was the day I got removed from my mother's care and placed in foster care. Foster care, if you can avoid it, try to. However, for some it is a much better experience than whatever they were growing up with before. For me personally, it was not great at all. I was neglected even further in foster care and mistreated to a great extent. So 0 out of 10 experience, would not recommend that either. Whole list of experiences I probably wouldn't recommend or, wish upon anybody, that I grew up with. So I ended up spending the night with my Aunt T, which was fine, it wasn't too far from where we were at anyway, and, the police gave my mom an ultimatum. It was either find somewhere for the kids to go or the police would take them themselves, right? And my mother, obviously not wanting us to go, she cried for a bit, she's a bit of an emotional one. She was sobbing by the end of it. But eventually she let our Aunt T pick us up, and she took us to her house to spend the night. I wasn't sure where my mom went after that for a while. So we spend the night there, and then the next day my Aunt M picks us up, and, we were given promises of finding a better home, and, living with my Aunt M was going to be like our permanent placement, right? And it was for a while. This was around August of 2019, so right before COVID. And we were there for a bit. Something happened, an altercation between me and a sibling or something like that, and I guess the state didn't like it all that much. I honestly regret it to this day. So the state was kind of monitoring me and that sibling and making sure we weren't at risk of doing that again. It was a pretty bad fight. And the state had given us the go-ahead. They said we're free to go, and, we weren't, they determined that we weren't at risk again, or that I wasn't at risk of causing problems again, right? So I'm staying with my aunt, and we had a good Christmas, a much better Christmas than most of what I had growing up anyways. And fast forward January, or around February, state hits my aunt and uncle up. We're like, Aaron's got to go. Aaron's got to go. You know, we can't risk him being there again, which was a total fucking twist of the neck there. That was not fun to hear at all because, you know, I thought back to all of those promises my aunt and uncle made of like, we're going to take care of you. This is going to be your forever home, you know, and we're going to give you a good life. And when I mentioned that to them, they were just like, sorry, nothing we can do. So that was pretty heartbreaking to have to listen to. But, you know, maybe there was a chance of finding something better in the future, you know? So I get placed with a group home. I don't think I'm going to name them. It was a group home for boys, though. And, you know, this group home wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad of a group home, but definitely an odd bunch of boys that I lived with. And needless to say, my experience there wasn't awesome, but it also wasn't, you know, unbearably terrible, you know? And back to the subject of school, I had started 6th grade at another middle school, Russell Middle School, and it was at this point that I just developed a deep hatred for school because it wasn't doing its job in distracting. Well, it wasn't really the job of the school, but I got upset about it really bad because it wasn't distracting me from, you know, the problem of not being around my mom anymore. And I've always been a little bit of a mama's boy. I love my mother to death, you know. So I developed a deep hatred for school, and pretty much all of 6th grade, I was just dicking around. I barely passed that, but I developed a habit of like putting things off until like the last minute, and then when the last minute came, I'd just go through everything and half-ass it, and somehow I passed. I don't know if that tells you anything about the school system in the U.S. If that doesn't tell you anything about the school system in the U.S., I'm not sure what will, but past that somehow, don't know. And eventually I got placed with a foster couple living down south of the Springs. And they weren't too bad. It was very obvious that they had no clue how to take care of a teenager because not even a month into me living there, I somehow fucked up really bad, and they grounded me for pretty much the rest of the year and a half that I lived with them. So, and it, like, to my own fault, I didn't clean up my act, not at all. And to be frank with you, I don't think I would change anything in my past for anything, because I like the way it is now, but I was I was in pretty rough shape for most of the time that I was in the foster care system. But that couple, they ended up kicking me out a year and a half later. That was the second foster home that I bounced from. And then I went with another couple that lived a little closer to the Springs. So I got to see my family a bit more often. And they weren't too bad. They couldn't handle me either. So I'm not sure if that says anything about me or about the people that the foster agency I was with who hired these people to take care of kids, because it didn't seem like anywhere at this point was interested in taking me because of my behavioral issues. And then it was after that couple, it was around Christmas of, it was Christmas of 2021 that they kicked me out. Or was it 2021? Yeah, it was 2021. It was around Christmas of 2021. I was going a normal day in 6th grade. I was, it was 8th grade at this point. 7th grade, I don't have much to take note on. I was a pretty mean kid in 7th grade. I remember telling a teacher he looked thicker than he did over Zoom calls and shit. I think about that, and part of me wants to giggle about it, and the other half is like, why would you say that, you fucking asshole? But I didn't cause many problems in 7th grade. 8th grade, the hatred for school kind of died down a bit, but we were just getting out of lockdown and stuff, and lockdown made 7th grade incredibly difficult. Lockdown made everything difficult, and had it not been for COVID, I'm sure things would be a lot different, but you never know. So I'm in the 8th grade at this point, and I get pulled aside into an office room with my caseworker. I don't remember her name or anything. And she tells me that I got kicked out and all my stuff has been packed and moved over to this new foster group home thing. And that was pretty unfortunate, and that kind of hurt to hear as well. And throughout the span of time up until that point, I started trying to get a little bit better about my behavior, but I still wasn't the best I could have been. You grow up in a messed up environment, you're going to, have a messed up way of thinking, I guess. And I get to the group home. It was I remember Christmas Day over there, and one of the staff handed me a big black trash bag that was full of toys and shit, and they told me to pick one out, and I saw a Nerf gun that I thought was cool looking, so I picked it out, and they said, no, you can't have that. Took it, and then took the trash bag away from me and wouldn't let me pick anything else. So that was a big slap in the face, which for a little bit I was very, very salty about. And that's not the only thing this group home kind of failed at doing. They treated me about the worst that any foster home or group home has treated me. There was one occasion where I was getting off school and the Uber driver wasn't there. And normally they would call an Uber driver to pick me up or take me to school, right? And they weren't there. So, and I didn't have a phone either. They didn't allow us to have phones. So I tried calling people around, and I couldn't remember the number of the group home. So I ended up pulling out my school laptop and messaging my friend Mike. Mike is a goat. He's been the most consistent viewer of this channel since I started it, and I love him to death for that. He is my biggest fan. Shout out to you, Mike. I love you to death, man. I messaged him, and he was like, well, I could get my mom to pick you up and you could spend the night here. And I was like, that would be nice, because it was January 21st of 2022, I think. Yeah, either 21 or 22. It was blizzard outside, blizzard conditions. I was wearing nothing but sweatpants, a hoodie, some canvas sneakers, and I didn't have gloves or a hat or anything. And by the time they got there, it was like I stood outside that school from when did that school get off? 3:50. And by the time my friend showed up, it was already 6 o'clock at night. And, so I don't know why my bandana keeps doing that. So I went with my friend Mike and his mom, and I stayed the night at their house, right? So fast forward to the next morning, Mike's mom takes me to the group home, right? I get in, I'm not greeted at all. They grunt at me, as if I'm some burden to them or whatever. And they wrote me down as a runaway, which was so backwards. I remember giggling at it when I first heard it, and then I walked into my room and saw that they confiscated all of my belongings except for my bed, my pillows, and my blanket. And they told me that had I waited there for 30 more minutes, they would have been there to get me. it was already 6 o'clock at night. It was cold. I couldn't feel my toes or my fingers. So as you can imagine, I was pretty infuriated by that response, and obviously I couldn't do nothing about it, so I just kind of went on about my day. And eventually I got my stuff back like 2 days later, and that place sucked. It was near Monument Park, Memorial Park. Sorry, not Monument Park. It was near Memorial Park, with the big fireman statue and stuff. The park that either has a lot of drug dealing going on or shootings and stuff, and the building itself was hell of a lot to speak of. They had one room closed off. None of the bedrooms had doors. They weren't allowed to. But this one, they had put the door back on because there was black mold growing on the ceiling. I don't know how they were allowed to just leave it like that. It was ridiculous. And the bathrooms were, I know I'm complaining now, but I know on one hand it was a roof over my head and food in my stomach. And let me tell you, the chef, he made some pretty damn good shit, and we just called him Chef. He was chill as fuck. He made wonderful food for and I couldn't be too mad at the food. But all the other circumstances that I was placed in with that group home was just abysmal. And, eventually I got lucky, and my friend Mike told me that his mom offered to take me in, and, I went through the process of talking to the caseworker and got all that set up, and I moved in with Mike. Wasn't much to speak on in school in that regard. 8th grade went by pretty easily. The hate for it had died down almost completely. Now it was just a mundane task that I had to do every day of my life. And I move in with my friend Mike, and, at first it was a great living space, but unfortunately Mike's mom was not always able to be around me, and with the condition I was in, I needed to be constantly monitored. I was struggling with a lot of mental health issues, and I still struggle with those today. It was around that time that I got diagnosed with major depressive disorder, ADHD, intermittent explosive disorder, and PTSD I had been diagnosed with when I was a lot younger. And I was kind of handling my own medications, which I'm not going to blame Mike's mom for that. That wasn't her fault. But that was not something I should have been in charge of. I lived with Mike for a few months and did well in school. I had started high school when I lived with Mike. So it was a bit of a fresh start, but high school proved to be a little rough on me too. And I was not doing my best to make the most out of it either. It was all a freshman and sophomore year. I kind of dicked around a lot. But eventually, my dad's mom's best friend offered to take me in so that way I'd be a little closer to family. And given the situation I was living, it was pretty rough. I mean, the room was filthy, and me being as depressed as I was, I couldn't really get up and clean it all that often. And we had bed bugs. I know that was pretty rough too. But that wasn't really anybody's fault. The house was really old, and it was, they tried many times to get the bed bugs out. They even had professionals come in and do it, and they just kept coming back. So I don't have any ill feelings about the family regarding the filth and stuff, because part of that was me and part of that was just they weren't really able to figure that out on their own. Mike's grandparents stayed upstairs. His grandmother, she had a really hard time with her knees and stuff, and she wasn't really able to come downstairs and help a lot either. And it was not the best. That basement was not in the best condition it could have been, but that's besides the point. Eventually, I got offered to go stay with my Nana's best friend, and, I took it. Moving in there, that was probably about the best decision I could have made. That woman, we'll call her Jay. That woman did not take a lick of shit from me. Any problems that I tried starting, she knew how to shut that. She knew how to shut that shit down really quickly, and it was because of her that I started cleaning my act up. And she got me in with a proper psychiatrist, and I had a doctor for a little bit, and I was going to the dentist and stuff, and I was really getting everything figured out with the state and stuff. And I stayed with her, and her and I butt heads even to this day about stuff, but I don't really live with her anymore, so it's like, but I lived with her until February of this year. After my Gammy had died, I needed to be with family, like, blood family. And so my great aunt and great uncle offered to take me in here, and here is where I am now. I don't have a bedroom. I have like a corner in the basement area, but it's better than nothing, and I got my own space for the most part. I've got a wonderful setup. And it, like, with Jay, school, she definitely pushed me to do better. In junior and senior year, I definitely kicked it up a notch. I think I passed junior year with like B's and above or something crazy like that. I think I only had like 1 C. That is by far the best I had done in years of going to school. And a lot of external circumstances were the cause of me not being able to handle school all that well. And I guess I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent about my life up until this point, but I never thought I would ever graduate high school. I thought I was going to be a dropout like my dad, and he's got his GED, but that's not really the same thing. And I really thought I was going to be a bum for the rest of my life. I had little to no aspirations with my future, and I'm still trying to figure all that stuff out today. And, who the hell isn't, And when my Gammy died, that just kind of threw all of everything I had going on off. I started dipping out of school again. I skipped a lot of school after all that happened. I missed about a month worth of classes and stuff because I was just... That woman was my best friend, and she... Throughout my entire life, she was kind of the only one who ever took the time to try and understand me and, my problems. Because her and I struggled with a lot of the same stuff, and not many people knew how to deal with either of us, But she knew how to deal with me, and it was because of her and a lot of other people that I was doing the best I could have been in school. And when she died, it was pretty heartbreaking. I was chilling here for dinner one night, and I remember getting a call from my cousin Alex, and you said something about my Aunt M getting a call from the coroner's office about a family member dying, and neither my mother or my grandmother were answering the phone, and apparently those were the only 2 people my aunt had set up for the coroner's office or something like that. So that was agonizing. For a good 4 hours, me and my family had no clue who had passed away until my mom eventually answered the phone, and my great aunt and great uncle ended up calling the coroner's office themselves to see what happened, and Gammy had passed. She wasn't that old either. She was 57, I think, which is really young for a grandmother. But a lot of my family is pretty young for my age. My mom is 36 and my dad is turning 37 in June. But that's not the point. It was after my grandmother had died that, like, school became a second priority to me, to everything else. Because me and Jay butt heads quite a bit about that stuff, and I don't think she quite understood the amount of pain I was going through. So it was up until the end of me living with her that, we really butt heads a lot, and it was pretty bad. But then I moved here, and, I was still skipping school for a bit, and about a month ago, I, was able to finally, get off my ass and start pushing to finish high school. And by this point, all of my classes were sitting at like 15% in the grade book. So I didn't have high expectations of me finishing high school, and I only needed 2 credits. I needed an English credit and a science credit or an elective credit or something like that. So, I mean, that definitely took the load off quite a bit, and thankfully both English and elective classes are super easy if you know what you're doing. It's a lot easier to keep a grade up than it is to bring one up, but still. So somehow, by the skin of my teeth and the hair on my nuts, I beat the game of high school. I had, let's see, 2, 3. I had 5 classes that I needed to attend. I only needed 2 credits though. So pretty much every class had an F except for the elective and the English one, which doesn't look good on a transcript, mind you. Seeing a bunch of Fs and stuff, even to somebody who never cared about grades and stuff. But, I got to walk the platform. I got to accept my diploma, and, I'm going to be honest, I don't think I could ever do a graduation ceremony again. That was awful. I was very overstimulated. I don't do well in social events. My social battery can get pretty low pretty quickly, and having all the people scream in your ears and stuff, and at one point having everybody have eyes on you at the same time was not fun in the slightest. And when I got home, it was, I'm recording a day after the graduation ceremony. I had to go to bed. I was laying down for pretty much the rest of the night, except for to eat dinner and stuff. But, somehow managing to pass high school definitely sparked a bit more motivation for me to pursue the stuff I enjoy a lot more. I've noticed recently I've been drawing a bit more, and I would show my art on here if it weren't for the fact that my art is not publicly agreed on, I guess. It's nothing like super gross or anything like that. It's just, it's the genre of art that I draw that isn't, for everybody. So I tend to keep that, separate, but, I do have all of that stuff linked on other pages and stuff. That doesn't matter. There was no need to boost myself like that. That was pretty annoying. Sorry. But yeah, despite all the struggles that I had in my personal life, somehow managing to get through school made me realize that, maybe life wasn't too bad after all. And, maybe perhaps getting through, everybody has struggles, and, logically my brain can, put that out there and I can acknowledge that. But like, to truly understand that, you have to achieve something really big. And getting my high school diploma, that was a really big thing for me. And, unfortunately, not a whole lot of my family could show up. I mean, my dad, my great aunt, great uncle, and my cousin were there. But, as long as people were there, But getting my high school diploma kind of made me realize that, there's a lot more to life than just things happening in the now. And, planning, you don't want to plan too far ahead, but, there are things in the future that you should be looking forward to. I never really thought about the high school diploma stuff or finishing high school up until this point, and I realized how much damage that kind of did to my psyche, not, pushing myself to something that was like a major stepstone in my life, But, I'm here now, and from here on out, I want to start dedicating myself to do more YouTube stuff. Something I didn't mention is growing up, ever since I first discovered YouTube on my mom's smart TV in, 2013, 2012? Ever since I discovered that people can do that and make money off of it, like, in me personally, I haven't really ever done this for the money. This was always more of a hobby for me, and, I really enjoy the the software aspect of all of it, Editing is really fun, so I tend to do that myself. Recording, it helps with the social anxiety. The more I do it, the more, expressive I become, and the more capable I am of handling social environments. Like, before, at one point during this YouTube channel's lifespan, I couldn't even handle ordering food, from a cashier, right? It was bad. I have always struggled with social anxiety. And at one point, it was really crippling for me. But now I'm at a point in my life where, I'm not having issues with that stuff necessarily anymore. Sure, the social battery is still pretty low, but at the same time, while it's there, I can be really sociable now. And, this channel and working on it has helped me develop a lot of skills throughout the years. And 3 years is a long time to be working on a social media page, And, I started off my social media journey on TikTok. TikTok, I've come to realize, is super easy. You do one stupid thing and, instantly a bunch of clicks and views and stuff. And it does, at that point, it doesn't even feel worth it. But I'm with YouTube, I have spent 3 years working on this shit. I've got 61 subs. That's not a whole lot, but can you imagine 61 people sitting in a room with you watching you play a video game or something? That's insane to me. So, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, for those of you who see this, who happen to be a year removed from graduating, before then, I think you should really stick to it, I know it's just a piece of paper that has a bunch of words on it and stuff, and it's not the material value that matters when it comes to this. It's a stamp of approval. That's not the right. It's physical proof that you dedicated yourself for 13 years to accomplish this. And 13 years, that's an ungodly amount of time to dedicate yourself to anything. I've been drawing for 15 years. That is an insane amount of time. But it's that dedication to finishing it that, while the reward isn't super immediate, getting to look at that paper that says you did it can be a lot more meaningful than just, the material value of it. Sure, it's a piece of paper, but, stamp of approval, So if you can manage it, to anybody who is seeing this who has yet to graduate, I think you should really go for it, And aside from the fact that, it'll help you get better jobs and stuff, it's an accomplishment, and I can't imagine the amount of disappointment I would feel if I went through 13 years of school just to get a GED, which I know is an equivalent in a lot of cases, but isn't. It just isn't. I can't imagine it would feel as rewarding as a high school diploma would be. because that means the difference between a high school diploma and a GED is that a GED, you failed high school and they're giving you a second chance to kind of take a bunch of short tests and at least get something, right? A high school diploma is proof that you did it the first time, and that's something you should be proud of. I have been talking for almost an hour now, and this is going to be a bitch to edit. But, if you can, like I said, heed my words, I know I'm just some dude on the internet, I'm not even a full-fledged adult yet. I'm 18 years old. I can't even drink yet. But I feel there's got to be some wisdom in my words in terms of, just the things that I've experienced up until this point. I had a lot of bullshit happen to me growing up. But the fact that I was able to push through all of that and manage to get the high school diploma is what feels good to me. I can't promise it'll feel the same to you. But, just look forward to it. If it's important that you achieve this. If not for yourself, achieve this for family or friends, because someone out there is going to be proud of you for doing it. You don't have to be proud of yourself, and Lord knows I'm not too infatuated, or I'm not too big on congratulating myself about it. But you got this, If it's your senior year and you've got shit to make up, go to summer school, do something, right? Just try as hard as you can to build up those credits and get that diploma. Not all hope is lost. And if you can only manage a GED, that's all right, it's an accomplishment nonetheless, And regardless of if it's a high school diploma or a GED, that's something to look forward to and, potentially be proud of, given how humble you may be, or if not humble. I have low self-esteem. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But yeah, I think that's all I've got to say right now. So if you like the video, leave a like, leave a sub, leave a comment if you want. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I don't give a shit. As always, I have never felt the need to pressure people into enjoying my content. If you don't like the slow-paced, dry humor that shits out my mouth constantly, or the lack thereof of talking, and, you don't have to click like, you don't have to subscribe, and you don't have to leave a comment. But I would appreciate it if you would at least listen to what I had to say. But yeah, I'm looking to record some other stuff here soon. I know I got to finish RE9, and had I not been drowning in schoolwork and stuff, I would have had it done by now. But consider this my confirmation that I will be completing it. Mike likes to tell me I never finish anything, which is incredibly false. I have finished many a series, but I'm getting on a tangent. Hopefully I will see you in the next one.